Okay, so welcome everyone from Regis Jesuit Rugby. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Karen. I am with the Rugger's Edge, and I'm joined this evening with Bill Huston, who is with Mindfish Test Prep, based here in Denver, Colorado. So he is going to be joining us shortly to kind of talk a little bit more about the testing side of things. What I'm going to do, I am going to go ahead and jump into a PowerPoint, mostly just to kind of keep us on track about the main points about what college rugby looks like, what the landscape looks like, and then things for student athletes to be aware of. But of course, if there's specific questions you have, please feel free to put it in the chat box so that I cover that for you. Okay, we're going to talk about college rugby 101. Just a little bit about me if you haven't heard who I am, or you're like, why did the coach tell me to sign up for this? So I'm a professional college consultant. This is what I do day in and day out. I talk about college and I talk about rugby. I'm a former rugby player myself. I was an All-American. I played on the junior national team as well as was in the national team pool for a while. It was a long time ago now. When I look at those years, I'm like, oh, it was a while ago. I moved on into refereeing. I was a B panel referee, meaning I reffed everything from youth and high school all the way up through collegiate and international matches as well. So that was really fun for me. Currently do more work on the education side. So I'm a World Rugby educator and trainer, meaning I go around the country and I certify people to be referees, which is a really fun thing that I get to do. I'm also based here in Colorado with you all, so I'm really excited to obviously work with local rugby players and rugby families. This is what we do. So when it comes to the Rugger's Edge, the goal here is just helping rugby student athletes. So what we're really focused on is helping every student athlete find their best fit, whether that is related to scholarship, whether that's related to recruiting, or simply finding a place where a student's going to thrive in being on a competitive program, a social program, or whatever it is. We do want to make sure that as many high school players that want to play in college, get to do so. So we're really excited to do a session like this to hopefully reach a bigger audience and encourage you all, to keep playing rugby. So this is what we're going to talk about. We'll talk about the college rugby landscape, some mistakes that you can avoid, and then steps to take now. Okay. I will mention there is a separate, slightly different College Rugby 101 webinar that's available on my website. So if you wanted some more detailed information, that one is available as well. This one's more specific for this evening. So I just wanted something a little bit different. And please stop me if I'm talking too fast, okay? So here is the college rugby landscape as of, this was from February 2022, as you can see from my slideshow. This is the general, the main thing I want to point out, this looks insane and this is crazy. I don't really want, the families that are watching this to get too confused or too crazy, okay? The main thing I want you to look at is that bar at the bottom. So, if you're on the boys team, you're really looking at around 400 teams. And then if you're on the girls team, you're really looking at about 380 women's college programs that are available to you in the future. Now, the reason this is not clear is because obviously because of COVID, there are teams that have been registered but have not played this year. Or there are teams that have played but have not registered. So there's just kind of this weird year right now where there's no actual confirmation of the final number of teams. So, hopefully the slide will change in the fall, but for now, this is kind of what we're looking at, is this weird kind of unknown about whether or not we're actually at 414 or maybe it's 410. The main thing that I tell students when they're looking at this is, I hate that it keeps doing that. Not focus so much on, kind of each individual, conference and those sorts of things, because that changes every single year. I update this slide probably every 3 to 4 months because things change so much. But it is to give you an idea that if you're sitting out there and thinking, I would like to play college rugby, chances are likely you can. Absolutely. I've been to, enough high school games here in Colorado. If you've played even one season, you can play in college. Now, there is a spectrum of whether or not you're going to play on a varsity level team or you're going to play on a club team. But either way, if you want to play, there is going to be a place for you. Okay. Then speaking of varsity, because I know there are some young women or some parents on here that have some girls that are playing, there is this small group of teams right now that are NCAA, meaning that they follow the same recruiting rules as every other traditional sport. It is a growing area. Women's rugby has been an emerging sport for many years, and every year we're adding, at least 2 to 3 new teams. So it's really exciting to see the growth. What this does for you as a young woman is there's definitely a lot more leverage for women's rugby than there used to be. So if you are looking at, for example, I'd love to go play somewhere and get scholarship dollars, there's certainly some available there, especially in the D1 non-Ivy League, D2 especially. And then obviously there's no scholarship money with D3 or any of the Ivy League schools, but there's still certainly some opportunities for merit scholarship and things like that. What I want you to keep in mind is if you're interested in any of these programs, you do have to follow the same kind of like recruiting timelines and contact rules that you would if you were looking at this as a soccer player or a volleyball player or something like that. So the number one thing I want you to walk away from, if you're a young woman and you're looking at NCAA, the first thing you're going to want to do, this is literally where you're starting out, you're going to want to register with the NCAA Eligibility Center. If you haven't done that, that's going to be your first step before you go ahead and reach out to any of these programs. On the flip side, if you are a young man, this doesn't apply to you at all because none of men's rugby is NCAA. So you do not need to fill out any forms. You don't need to follow any of those rules. This is very specific to women's rugby. Okay, so we're going to talk about 4 of the mistakes that I usually see. Okay, so when I'm working with students and families, these are the main things that I tend to see. So the number one mistake is not focusing on the fit. Okay, so what does this mean? These are the main things that I see that if you don't do a good job thinking through what is it that you're looking for in a college, a lot of times that fit is not going to work. This is when you start seeing students looking to transfer, coming home after only the first quarter or something like that. So the main things that I see is thinking through, where do you want to be for college? What size of a college do you want to, to be at? What kind of academics are offered? Are there a couple majors you're interested in? Does this college offer it? What kind of atmosphere is it? Is it social? Is it more intellectual? Like what kind of vibe does that school have? And obviously fit is the financial piece and making sure that, you can afford it as a family. You'd be surprised how many families I meet with that the parents and the students have not actually talked about what is our budget? What does it look like? Are we looking at what the typical cost of going to an in-state Colorado college is? That's one thing. Or are we looking at, we're looking at private schools where potentially the sticker price is in the 60,000s. Right? So making sure that we have those discussions ahead of time. So you're not just kind of willy-nilly looking at any college that's out there and then you're applying to colleges, and then in the end, maybe it doesn't work out based on the cost. What you'll notice here about the fit, I actually don't really focus too much on the rugby, right? So if I was building a college list, I actually focus more on the college side first, and then see how rugby fits into it, not the other way around. Okay, so rugby is one of those things that, as you all know, you play it, it is a collision sport, right? So chances are likely at some point you're going to get hurt, whether that's going to be something small, hopefully, just something small like a sprained ankle, or it could be something big. I do want you to make sure that this college, wherever you end up, it's a good fit, that if you got injured, you would still want to be there. So you do want to operate on what I call the broken leg rule, right? If you break your leg, do you still want to be there? Is it in the right location? Is it the right size? Do you have the right, size for classes, and you have good involvement with your professors and things like that? Does it have the majors you want? Does it feel the way you want for college? Okay. So definitely focus on fit before we even get to anything else. Okay. All right. This is a piece of fit, but it's going to be second to those other things. Okay. So thinking about the fit of what kind of program do you want? So there's going to be 3 different types of programs that are going to be available to you with college rugby. There's going to be varsity, which is an intercollegiate program. So if you saw those NCAA ones, those are all varsity. Those are supported by the school. Those are exactly what you think of a, at your own high school. If it's supported by the school, like a varsity football team or a varsity basketball team. In the middle, you're going to have programs that are club varsity, meaning they're like sort of varsity, but also sort of club, kind of a hybrid. Rugby is one of the few sports that has kind of this weird middle ground. And then on the third, on the other side is club. The vast majority of college rugby out there is club, which means if you want to go play club rugby at CU Boulder, you just get into the school, you walk onto the team, right? Same with the University of Denver or Regis or Colorado College. Those are all club programs. Now, it doesn't mean they're worse or better. It just simply means they're not fully supported as an intercollegiate athletic team on that campus. Okay, a club varsity example would be like a Penn State or University of Arizona, where the school has decided to support more than their typical clubs, but not like all the way like they do for their varsity teams. Okay, so when you're thinking about what is going to be a good fit for you, this is what I want you to think about more than kind of the description of, is it varsity or club or whatever. It's how much time do you want to commit to a team? Okay, so you're going to see as you start searching colleges, and one of the things I want you to think about is how often, what is the time commitment for this team? Typically with a varsity team, you are going to be on this higher end. You're going to be on that high performance level, 8 to 10 out of 10, where you're doing 20, 25 plus hours a week of rugby. That includes weightlifting, meetings, reviewing film, travel, all that kind of stuff, right? In the middle, you're going to have more competitive programs. These are kind of just more in the middle, maybe 15 to 18 hours, somewhere in there. Social is more like 8 to 10. So, again, you're just kind of thinking about what would you like to do, as you're thinking about college, what does that setup look like for you? There's a good question that just came through. How did these affect scholarship dollars? I'm going to answer it and then clarify for me if I'm not answering it for you, okay? Typically, if you're looking at scholarship dollars, these are athletic scholarship, it's going to come from a varsity program. Now, you can have a varsity team and not have scholarship, right? So you can be Harvard, which is a varsity women's program, and not have access to any athletic scholarship money because that's just the way the Ivy League works. But you can also be club varsity at Penn State and not have any varsity dollars, but they can help with admission. So there's a couple different ways that works. But typically, if one of your driving criteria in all this is to discount the total cost of college and athletic scholarship as a piece of it, you are looking at varsity programs. Okay. Hang on, there's another question. Oh, perfect. All right, I did answer. Thank you. Okay. So second mistake to avoid is not having a timeline, not thinking this series. We've got a lot of juniors that's on this call. I also know that there is maybe a freshman, I think, and a sophomore. Plan out your year. I mean, if it's April of your junior year, you really should already be thinking about, what am I doing in May? What am I doing in June, July, August, September, right? Thinking through, are there camps I'm going to? What tournaments am I doing to? If I'm going to do test prep, and we'll talk about testing in a minute, what does that look like? If I have to test, when's a good time? I'm surprised how many students say, oh, I don't know, I'll do it in the fall. I'm like, okay, wait, but like when? Because your school starts this date, you have this happening, you're going to be applying, like you start throwing in all the dates, students start realizing that there's not a lot of time, right? So if you're a junior, you're going to start applying. Applications open August 1st. A lot of my students apply in August. That's only a couple months from now, right? So you do want to start thinking about what that timeline might look like. If you are a female athlete thinking about NCAA, there's certainly a timeline for prospective students. If you are a junior, this should have already happened. It should be happening now. You're almost a bit late. You're not too late, but it would be happening. You need to be doing the eligibility center, recruiting questionnaires, going through all of that, communicating with coaches. That would be happening now, spring of your junior year. Okay. Before I go into this, which is another really big mistake, because we are talking about timelines, I actually am going to have Bill hop in here and talk about testing, because that's a huge part of the testing timeline, or about the recruiting process that is always looked over. It's almost like thrown in, and it's a huge piece of this puzzle, especially if you're going to be recruited. If we look at a pyramid, the bottom part, the kind of foundation of all this is going to be your grades and your classes. Right in the middle is going to be testing. Everything else is going to be on top. So without kind of that bottom solid foundation, there's not a lot we can do, right? You can be a great athlete, But without that foundation, there's nothing more we can do. So,
yep. Can you see that?
Yep.
So Karen had college rugby 101. I've got standardized testing 101. Thank you so much, Karen. I'll make a few quick comments now, and I can chime in on other stuff soon. Karen, thanks for having me here. My name is Bill Huston, and I run a company called Mindfish, which does a lot of SAT and ACT prep, as well as academic tutoring and stuff like that. And we've worked with quite a lot of kids in the area, including a great number of Regis students over the years. So happy to chat with you all. There's a lot of information in this PowerPoint that I'm sharing. I can send a PDF to everybody who's here, or I'll have Karen do that after the meeting tonight. So there's too much information to get through tonight in here. So I'll skip to a couple things. First, I'm actually going to go to the end of this presentation and talk about the timeline, because that's where Karen left off here. So junior year is highlighted here, or if we go back here, the testing timeline, we've got a red star in junior year, because this is the time to really engage with the SAT and ACT, to decide when you're going to take the test, to do any preparation that you're thinking about doing. But the time within junior year can vary a little bit. Of great relevance to this group is that often athletes, especially recruited athletes, or as Karen was saying, female athletes who are going through the NCAA process for rugby, want to start doing testing a little bit earlier than the general population of students would want to engage with the process. And the reason for that is you're going to be talking to coaches earlier. They're trying to build their teams earlier in this process. And if you can give them a test score, it really helps them kind of get a sense for where your academic, where you lie in the academic environment of that school. Karen, in one of your slides, I noticed for women's rugby anyway, we've got a whole bunch of Division I Ivy League schools, right? Harvard, Dartmouth, and Princeton, I think, we're all on that list that you shared. Those, needless to say, are some of the best schools in the country. They have incredibly high academic standards. So if you're talking to the coach at Harvard, you want to be able to say to her, hey, I'm taking the ACT. I did it, in September of my junior year. I got a 31. What do you think of that number, coach? Right? Because at a school like Harvard, Karen made a couple of points about that. They're not going to give you any scholarships to play rugby at Harvard. In the best case scenario, you can use your rugby talents as a lever to get into the school. And they're also not really going to give you too much leeway to not be up to their academic standards. At a lot of other schools in the country with maybe less insanely competitive academic standards, there's a lot more flexibility. If you have a lower ACT score or lower SAT score, the coach can get you in the door in a lot of cases. For a place like Harvard, Princeton, Dartmouth, those kind of schools, it's not going to be as much flexibility. So the coach wants to have a shorthand to say, oh, yeah, you're basically at the level that we're hoping for the rugby team. And test scores are a great way to do that. Karen also mentioned GPA and these other kind of fundamental parts of the college process. All those things are helpful, but a test score is a really handy shorthand for a coach, because they're not going to look at, oh, what school did you go to and how does the rigor of the courses at that school differ from some other recruit? Like, that's what the admissions office does. The coach can look at your SAT and ACT score really quickly and say, okay, yep, she's either like near where we want or not quite what we're looking for, right? And so that's why a lot of recruited athletes will engage with this process a little bit earlier. So we're getting towards the end of the school year. I'm already talking to a lot of rising juniors. That's people who would be juniors next year, finishing sophomore year right now. I'm already talking to a lot of these families about starting the testing process. That doesn't mean they're going to be testing like next month or anything like that, but we're starting to plan. And so what we'll do with a lot of these students who test earlier is we'll maybe do some prep over the summer and aim to take a first test in late August, early September, something like that. And just so you know, that's the earliest I ever recommend taking an official SAT or an official ACT. And again, that's advantageous for recruited athletes. That's not necessarily the best plan for other people. So a lot of students, either students who are not student athletes or student athletes who are looking at D3 club, these types of programs, there's no huge rush to test. Karen, correct me if you have anything to add or you think this is wrong. But if you're looking at a club team, a D3 team, you've got a little bit more time. You don't need to have a score right at the beginning of junior year. And for those students, I generally recommend testing somewhere in the broad middle of junior year.
Yeah.
For me, that means like somewhere between between October and February. Those 4 months kind of in the middle of junior year. Karen, do you roughly agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I was going to mention is, especially with athletes, right? And that's what we're talking about right now. I think part of
it's busy.
Yeah, it starts getting busy. So thinking through when is the best time to take a test, keeping in mind when is really the best time to prep. So if you're like, oh my gosh, like May is crazy because I have AP tests, I have finals, I have this, we have, I don't know, you have a lot of, Rocky Mountain, rugby, your league is happening right now. If it's really crazy, maybe the spring is not really a great time. Maybe you're looking more like end of the summer because you can prep in the summer. So just kind of taking into account what's actually happening in your whole life. So a lot of my students, I'll say, look, like take out literally your entire year and start marking off the big things that you're like, look, I don't want to be prepping during Thanksgiving, or I don't want to prep over the holidays. And you start figuring out, well, look, the best time for me is this time. And then you can figure, I mean, you're going to get the best results when you can actually dedicate, you're just like, oh, I'm going to I'll just take a class. And then it's like, week to week, and you're not going to get any better. So it should be a good time where you can like dedicate your actual focus to the test prep so you get good results.
Totally. And just to throw something in there in the same vein, I look at testing as a 5 to 6 month process because most people take these tests more than once, especially if they're really trying to push their scores to the highest level. And so what the 5 to 6 months look like would be 2 to 3 months of prep before the first test, take your first test, and probably take a second test about 2 months after the first one. I see most students taking the test 2 or 3 times these days. And so when you're trying to kind of sketch out your timeline for junior year and figure out when the best time to engage with this is, I sort of look at find the 5 to 6 months that sort of sits the most conveniently within your schedule. Don't get me wrong, it's never convenient. There's never enough time to do this stuff. It's always super busy, but there are better times than others for most students. And so the whole process to me is roughly 5 to 6 months long. Karen, just to kind of set the scene, the other stuff I've got in here that I was thinking about chatting about are test optional policies, SAT versus ACT, all of this stuff. I can do that now, or if you want to keep going, I can jump in whenever it makes sense.
Yeah, the only thing I was really hoping you would touch on, because I right now I've been getting a lot of questions from juniors because I think in their high school they're doing the SAT and they're wondering, or I might have been the first one to say, hey, have you thought about the ACT? And that's like, no, there's still that myth floating around that certain colleges like the SAT better and that sort of thing. So I think it'd be helpful to kind of set the stage about you may be taking the SAT now, or if you're a freshman, your high school is probably going to do it in your high school this month. But you have the option to take the ACT in every college if they take a score, if you feel like submitting it because it's optional, they will take either or. So I was hoping, I think Bill can kind of walk us through a little bit about like maybe some main differences or ways to figure out which one you should take, or do you stick with the SAT or, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people focus on the SAT here in Colorado because that's the state test. That's the test that is required in public high schools. Now at Regis, tell me if I'm wrong, anybody on the chat, if I'm wrong about this, please let me know. But in recent years, I believe Regis has given both an ACT and an SAT to the junior class. Can anybody jump on the chat and tell me if that's right or wrong? That's a policy that I like quite a lot. And I think it was just in the last couple of weeks that there was an ACT given at Regis. So yeah, Karen, to your point, there are any school in the country will take either the SAT or the ACT equally at this point. And that wasn't always the case. I took these tests back in the 90s, a bygone era called the 1990s. And it was very much geographical in terms of which schools preferred or accepted which test.
Oh, Bill, they said
Got it.
no.
Okay.
Yeah, did you see that?
Yeah. Michelle, thanks for that comment. So no more SAT and Regis this year, just an ACT. Very interesting. Public schools focus on the SAT. Regis gives an ACT. I think that's great. Frankly, anecdotally, in my business, we work with about 500 students a year. I would say 2/3 focus on the ACT, about 1/3 focus on the SAT. That doesn't mean that one test is better or worse than the other, but it does mean that I think in most cases, one test is better or worse for individual students. And that's something I really believe in. So again, years ago, different schools preferred or only looked at one test or the other, SAT or ACT. For instance, the East Coast was very much SAT territory 30 years ago. But that's all changed. The tests are accepted equally across the board by any school in the country. There's no preference or bias. So this is one of my common misconceptions. All institutions will accept SAT or ACT equally in this day and age. So what I really recommend is take an official practice test of both types. They're freely available online. My company, for instance, has a program where you can do one of each and we'll sit down and compare the results. You can find tables online that compare the two scores. I think it's a very individual preference about whether a student wants to do the SAT or the ACT. And so there are some generalizations we can make, and I'll talk about those in a second. But for me, it really comes down to the individual preference of each student and which test they feel more comfortable with, which test they're doing better on when they start this process. Now, there are some differences, and some of these generalizations I think actually hold water. For instance, this one on the ACT. We've found that students who have extra time accommodations on both SAT and ACT generally end up doing better on the ACT. To put that another way, accommodations are more helpful on the ACT than they are on the SAT. Now, there should be an asterisk here because you have to apply for them separately, and some students get accommodations on the SAT and not on the ACT. In fact, that's reasonably common. ACT is a little bit more stingy with giving out accommodations than the SAT is. So again, it depends on the individual student's situation. If you have accommodations on one test and not the other, you're probably going to do better on the one you have accommodations on. If you have accommodations on both, I generally think the ACT is a good fit. This is also a decent rule of thumb on the ACT. It's a quickly moving test. So students who are able to set a good pace and manage their time well often do well on the ACT. Who's better at the SAT? Again, these are generalizations. Please take them with a grain of salt. But the SAT is a trickier test than the ACT. So students who are kind of like good at problem solving on their feet, kind of out of the box thinkers are often a good match for the SAT. Same thing, the counterpoint I would make about time management. Students who have trouble with time management sometimes are a better fit for the SAT because there's more time per question on the SAT than there is on the ACT. There's a reason I put this in blue with both italics and boldface down here, a little over the top, but I really think students should try one of each and see which one they're doing better on, see which one they like more. And again, you can find these tests online. These are all active links. So when I share this PDF, you can follow these links and find some practice tests for yourself if that's of interest.
I had an extra space in there. Because we're talking about communication with coaches. Number one, communication with coaches typically will start happening second semester of your junior year. So if you're in your junior year, this, like I was mentioning earlier, it either should have started or it should be starting now. Okay, so if we're talking about NCAA programs, they can't actually start talking to you or can't start talking to a student until after typically July 1st of their junior year, which is that summer leading into the junior year. If you are a boy, they can talk to you at any time, but normally the reason they're not really going to do anything with you till second semester junior year is that is when you have test scores to show, you have a longer track record on your transcript, so they can see, are you admissible? Because that's one of the big things when it comes to recruitment on the boys and the girls side. Rugby is a developing sport. There's way more options now than when I was playing, but even still, we're not at the point where any program out there can say, if you're such a great athlete, we can disregard your academic profile and we can just get you in. You have to look like a student that would already get into that school, or at least look pretty close, before they can actually start talking about supporting you, giving you scholarship money, any of that kind of stuff. So it certainly, helps build your profile and your recruitability if the academic profile is very strong. Okay, so you need that before we can even add in the rugby talent. Like, I really don't care if you're the best rugby player coming out of Colorado, if you're barely getting through high school. From a college coach standpoint, they're really looking at you as a big risk, right? You're looking at someone that's not going to make it through their first semester. So they're wasting a spot on you if they recruit you, okay? If you're starting to communicate with coaches, poor communication is the quickest way to just get deleted and not get looked at. So this is a good example of like a mass email that my friends who are coaches get these every single day. They get an email. Number one, it might say, "Hi, Katie," when maybe the coach's name is Smith, right? I would say, "Dear Coach Smith," or something like that. This is, just random. "My name is Dennis. I'm 23 years old." This person is obviously like outside of really like college age already too. And the first thing they say in the second sentence is, "I'm looking for a scholarship." So even if that is a piece of your criteria, that's what you're looking for, I would not put that in the beginning, right? That's something you want them to bring up later, but it's not something right from the get-go you're asking about, right? And everything here is pretty general. There's nothing in here that says, "Look, I'm really interested in, I'm really interested in Notre Dame College because you've got this nursing program and that's what I want to do," or "I'm interested in Mount St. Mary's because one of my former captains is there and he told me all about the team." Like, you do want to show that you've done some research why you're reaching out, and that it's not just kind of this, kind of mass email, which happens all the time. Okay, so make sure if you are communicating with the coach, number one, make sure you're emailing the right coach and that it's about the right school, right? You don't want to email Coach Miles at Mount St. Mary's, but put Coach O'Brien, who is the head coach for St. Mary's in California, right? So you want to make sure it's the right coach for the right school and that it's fairly personable, right? Like, you wouldn't want some general email to you. You want it to be one that is directed to yourself. So kind of keep that in the same vein, okay? The other mistake to avoid here is improper social media. I've had more and more coaches point out to me how poorly high school students are using their social media. Either A, if you're going to have it, if you have Twitter, if you have Instagram, anything like that, either make it private where they can't look at it, or always come at it from the standpoint of, if I wouldn't want my grandmother to see this, I would be embarrassed if she saw this, I wouldn't put it up. So these are football examples, but these are two examples from another session I was in where the football programs pulled these students' offers when they posted these sorts of things, because it becomes more of a risk, right? So just be careful what you're putting out there from an admission standpoint and from a recruiting standpoint. There's enough students out there, right? Like, if you want a chance at something special like this, you don't want to hurt your chances by doing something just kind of brainless, right? So think through what you're going to put out there. It is out there forever. Something I always think is interesting is you might put something out there and someone else might point out what you've done to coaches. So it's out there forever. Someone, "Hey, by the way, I saw that you're recruiting this person. Did you see what they wrote?" Right? So be careful about that. Here's another mistake to avoid, is just disorganization. So here on the left, when I've gone to students' homes and kind of seen what they're working with, this is sometimes what it looks like. And hopefully your desk doesn't look like this. One of the biggest things when I asked coaches, I did a little poll. I was like, what is the one skill you want high school athletes to be good at by the time you get to college? And I'm thinking they're going to talk about passing skills, right? Contact skills, rucking, or something like that. And the biggest thing they told me is time management, schedules, because especially if you're going to go on that varsity side or even that competitive club varsity side, you're really going to have to manage your time of being an athlete on top of being a good student, right? We need to keep you eligible, but you also need to work in a daily conditioning session, a daily field session, meetings, if we need to make a plane ride on Thursday, you need to be at this field for the bus at this time. None of the coaches want to hold your hand. So if at any point they start feeling like, oh my gosh, this student can't do anything without mom or dad helping them, you start dropping lower on that list. So I would really recommend in high school, you start managing as much of your schedule as possible. If you're communicating with coaches, that's on you to communicate, not on mom or dad. Those are all things you need to start practicing being in charge of, because that is what coaches are looking for. That's like the number one thing. Okay, so let's talk about what the next steps look like. Okay, so we're going to focus on these 4 things. And there was a question about how do you get more on people's radar. So that is something we're going to talk about here. The number one thing, okay, so grades. 3.0 or higher is is best. You're going to get the most options if you have that. And then also obviously the test scores, right? If you have strong test scores, that helps a ton. So if we're talking about if you're a female athlete and you're looking at some of those more competitive colleges, I've had a lot that are going there this upcoming year. The number one thing, I had a coach in January that was like, at one of these really highly selective schools saying, do you have anyone that meets this academic profile? Because I can't find anyone. So that should tell you the pool is very small of talented players that have an academic profile that admissions will say okay to. So the higher your academic profile is, the stronger your chances are going to be for a lot of things, okay? Number 2, you want to try to create that target college list. If you're on the younger side, if you're a freshman or a sophomore, thinking through what we talked about in the very beginning about fit, what are the things we're looking for, creating that target college list so that you can start thinking through, for example, that question about how do you get seen. If you start saying, okay, I'm really interested in varsity programs and I am looking at Central Washington, or I am looking at American International College, or whatever the case may be. Now then we're going to look at, do they have camps coming up this summer? Did they have a winter ID camp? Are they going to be at another camp that I could be seen at? Or are they going to, like, Tropical Sevens is this weekend, right? A ton of coaches are going to be at that tournament. That would be something. Or high school nationals, which is happening in May. So once you kind of know what that list is, then we want to contact, okay? Like, even if you're on the younger side, it doesn't hurt to say, hey, by the way, I'm really interested in your program. I am playing this weekend for the ERA team or the Atlantis team, and I hope to say hi to you, right? So you want to start building that relationship early, but it's not just, throw, darts at a dartboard, right? You want to have it fairly strategic about who you're reaching out to and why. Number 3, I would really, really recommend you visit colleges. So whether you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, or even a senior, if you're a senior and you're like making decisions, hopefully you are visiting. But prior to that, getting on campus. I have a player right now who's a junior. He's on spring break. He's going to go look at Penn State this week. Connected him to the coach. The coach has a break from 1 and 3. They're going to meet in person. They have practice from 4 to 6. So the student's going to get to see how practice is run, see what the vibe is, see if it's a good fit, right? See if he likes the way the coach works with the players, the assistant coaches, all that kind of stuff. So all of these programs are going to be really helpful if that's something you want to do. Not only does it help you as a student athlete, see if it's a good fit, it allows those coaches to get to know you as well, right? So that idea of getting on someone's radar, it's not a one-time thing. It's got to be kind of built over time. So it's, this player will maybe visit and see, might go to the summer camp, and then might, go watch a game, one of their fall games. And then that coach is like, wow, this player is really serious about the school. I'm more willing to help him because I've gotten to know him versus some other guy that just emailed just to email. Okay. The 4th thing I would want you to do, if you haven't done this yet, is make a rugby resume. If you don't have one of these, you can find it on my website. Just go to ruggersedge.com. It's under resources. It's a drop down, and you just go to create a rugby resume. There's a download a template. I would have that ready to go. So when you're talking to a coach, it's an easy thing you can send over either as a Google Doc, which I recommend a lot of students do. It's just a link that you can constantly update. Or if you do make it into like a PDF, you can just send it over. But it's a 1-page thing that they can see everything, right? They can see your academic profile, they see your rugby experiences, they see links to film, those kinds of things, okay? I want to make sure I'm answering this question. So the question is, what is the best way to be seen by varsity programs or elevated club programs in person, aside from recruitment forms? So the recruitment form is the best starting spot. So you'd want to fill out the form. The next thing after that is obviously if the program hosts a camp, you want to go to the camp if that works with your schedule. Second would be tournaments. So the bigger national tournaments are usually where they're going to be. If that doesn't happen, really the third option is film. Film. The more film you have, the better. It does not have to be super fancy. On a phone is fine, right? Like I need a lot of film. The more coaches can see what you play like, the better. So I look at it like you just want more opportunities, right? So if you have game film plus tournament film, it just gives you more chances to show like your decision making, your whatever the case may be. So hopefully I answered your question. If I didn't, go ahead and add something more in there and I'll answer more. Here's some standardized test stuff that I know that Bill has touched on. I mean, this is something to keep in mind that, again, if we're talking, I mean, none of these programs have direct admission pull. No, actually Dartmouth does, obviously, with the women's team, but if you are looking at Dartmouth from a women's perspective, or even from the men's perspective, this is that middle 50%. You need to be somewhere in the middle of this to feel like you've got an honest shot, right? So this is helpful. You can find all of these if you look at your schools and look up common data set, like that is where you're going to find these things, okay? Here are some resources. I have a guidebook that's available online that you can purchase. I'll send you the details when I follow up with an email. These are other things that I always mention, connect with, with a newsletter. I've got a Facebook page. Let us help you. I do a free 30-minute consultation with everybody. If that's something that, that you're interested in, if you're curious, that's something that we do as well. And now I'm going to go to just questions. We've got about 10 minutes left here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this and let me make sure. Looks like we have another question in here. Question here is, are the USA Rugby Prospect ID camps worthwhile? Do college coaches attend? Oh, that's a great question, because I know there definitely was one just recently. So the USA Prospect camps are not related to college recruitment. So that is about USA national team pathway stuff. So that is like, if you go to a camp and you get seen, it is for high school All-Americans, junior All-Americans, and then senior national team. Now, it's somewhat related because obviously if you go, and I think you have to be 16, if you're selected for high school Americans from a college perspective, that's quite nice, right? It's a pretty quick shorthand for coaches who maybe haven't seen you. They're like, oh, but if Coach Keene has seen him and selected him for high school All-Americans, he's probably pretty good. So it sort of is related, but not exactly. So I don't know if that answers your question. Will you just touch on test optional? Because I know we're talking about testing and everyone's probably like, wait, I heard that it didn't. So I want to make sure we clarify that too.
That's exactly what I was going to offer to talk about real quick while people are thinking of questions. So the pandemic kind of drastically accelerated some dynamics that we've been seeing about the SAT and ACT tests over recent years. Namely, most schools moved to test optional admissions policies near the beginning of the pandemic. And so this is kind of the $1 million question that a lot of people are asking about the SAT and ACT. Aren't schools dropping them? I'm going to come back to this slide in a second. To me, these are kind of the takeaways right now. I'm a big fan of keeping your options open because it's a very uncertain landscape right now. That's why I say here, uncertainty rules the day. 2 weeks ago, MIT, not a rugby school to my knowledge, but a bellwether school in the country, announced that they're going to require the SAT and ACT starting this fall again. Georgetown announced the same thing about a year ago. Public school systems around the country, a lot of them in the Southeast, are also requiring SAT and ACT again, namely North Carolina schools, Georgia schools are now requiring the SAT and ACT. So we don't know what all the policies will be at these schools next year. It's shifting all the time. And that's why I say keep your options open. You don't have to submit your test scores if you take them, right? And if you take them, you can also choose to submit them to some schools and not to other schools. And so the metaphor I use in this work a lot is having a good test score in your college toolbox is a good tool to have available to you. How you use it, whether you use it, when you send those scores, that's a different question. And if you're working with someone like Karen, she can say, yes, send your scores to this school, but maybe not to this other school. That gives you a lot of flexibility with how to package your enrollment. And I popped off the screen for a second because I went to go grab my book. Karen, you might have read this book. I'm reading this book called Who Gets In and Why by Jeff Salinger. It's
Yeah,
like
really good.
it's one of the most popular admissions books of our time right now. And he added a little foreword to the second edition of this book and said something like, he gives all this data. At schools that are test optional, more people are getting in who submit tests than otherwise. He cites Emory University. About twice as high a percentage of admissions for people who submit tests versus people who don't submit tests, 17% versus 8.5%. I'm quoting now. The same was true at Colgate, 25% with tests, 12% without tests. Same with Georgia Tech, 22% admitted with tests, 10% without tests. So I'm not saying everybody needs to test. I'm not saying everybody should submit their test, but it's an uncertain time, and having a score available to you is helpful. Again, I'm going to share this PDF so you guys can all process this. But notice, and I've used this presentation in a bunch of different webinars like this, but I mentioned athletes specifically first because scores are helpful for athletes. It gives you a talking point with the coach. There's other great resources in here. Fair Test is a great resource for seeing which schools are test optional. And there is this concept called test blind. A minority of schools in the country, including Karen's alma mater, if I'm remembering, UC
Yeah.
Davis.
Yep.
Some schools are not even looking at tests, no matter what. If you apply to UC Davis, you want to play the rugby, they cannot look at your tests. It's not even an option for them, even if they wanted to on an individual basis. But there's only like 80 schools that are test blind in the country. Most are test optional, which means they don't require tests, but they'll look at them if you send them. And here's the kicker, if they're good, they'll usually help your profile.
Yep. Perfect.
So feel free to ask me questions about that or other questions about testing. Or Karen, if you have other things that you'd like me to cover, I'm here. And you know, I want to value people's time. It's almost 7 o'clock, but feel free to jump in with more questions.
Yeah. I mean, I think the main thing, and obviously I'll send out a follow-up email with all of our information. If you have questions, I mean, I think Bill's a great resource. If you just have questions about testing, I mean, certainly when I do, I'm like, ask Bill, ask the Mindfish group, because that's not something that, you know, that I really touch. Like I really only do all the college admission side. The kind of two big main takeaways I want you to think about that I mentioned earlier. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, can I play college rugby? The number one answer I'm gonna tell you is yes. If you're curious where that might be, that's definitely something we can talk deeper about. But above all, like I want everyone to know, if you want to have this, it's a very special experience to be able to play college sports, whether that's club or if it's varsity or somewhere in between. It gives you this kind of guaranteed kind of family and friends and things like that in college that not a lot of people get. So I would certainly kind of at least see what your options are. And the second is just to know that the process, kind of that timeline piece of knowing that, if you're a junior, like I want you to get started now. So it's rarely late, but obviously if you're looking to be recruited, fall of your senior year is a bit late. A lot of them will fill up their rosters by then. So now is a really, really good time to get started on the process. If you're a freshman or sophomore, to start building towards that, knowing that this is coming the spring of your junior year. And with that, I'll say thank you for taking the time to learn a little bit more about college rugby. There's a lot more resources on my website as well, and some more detailed webinars if you're interested in looking at that. And of course, Bill and I are here as a resource. So thank you again, and hopefully I will see you all out at the pitch soon. And good luck on the rest of your season. All right, thanks, Bill.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, everyone. Bye.